The gun was shaking. She wasn't. When the masked man pointed the weapon at her face, everyone else hit the floor. She stayed standing, calm. In the corner booth, a man who hadn't moved in 7 years looked up slowly. He knew that voice. The waitress didn't recognize him, but she had saved his life once, and he had built an empire because of it. If you're listening right now, kindly tell me where you're watching from and how the weather is right now. Then don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. Now let's go back to the story. She looked at the man behind that gun the way a doctor looks at a patient who is pretending to be fine, steady, reading, measuring every small thing he didn't know he was showing. His hand had a tremor in it, not much, but enough. His weight kept shifting to his left foot, the way people do when they want to run but haven't decided yet. Young, maybe 22, 23 at the most, desperate was written all over every inch of him, though he clearly wanted it to read dangerous. "Open the register," he said, his voice cracked on the last word. Zariah uncrossed her arms slowly, placed both hands flat on the counter between them, and looked directly into his eyes through that mask. "There's $312 in that drawer," she said. Her voice was so even it almost didn't sound human. "Is that really what you came in here to throw your whole life away for?" The man blinked. Nobody had expected that. Nobody in the room had expected that. The woman hiding in the corner booth looked up from behind her child's hair. The cook in the back pressed himself against the wall and went completely still. Because Zariah hadn't screamed, hadn't begged, hadn't reached for the register. She had just told the truth in a tone that cut right through the noise of the moment. And that gun lowered. Half an inch, maybe less, but it lowered. In booth 3, 4 feet from the counter, a man in a tailored navy suit had not moved since the moment that masked figure walked through the door. His coffee sat untouched in front of him, steam still rising from it in thin white curls. His hands were flat on the table, his dark eyes were locked on the young woman behind the counter, and his chest had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with fear. He knew that voice. He couldn't explain it yet, not fully, not with everything happening in real time in front of him, but somewhere deep in his memory, a door had just blown open. Rain, a bridge, the black of a night 7 years ago when he had been standing in a place he should never have been, making a decision he could never take back, and a voice, calm and steady and completely unbothered by the weight of what it was walking into, had said something to him that changed the entire direction of his life. He stared at her. His jaw tightened. It can't be her, he thought. It cannot be her. Then the bell above the front door rang. Not the sound of a customer looking for a table, not the soft entrance of someone who wanted coffee and a seat near the window. 2 men in dark, fitted jackets stepped inside and let the door swing shut behind them. They didn't look at the masked gunman. They didn't look at the frightened customers pressed against the floor. They looked at exactly one person, the man in booth 3, and they were smiling. What would you have done if you were standing exactly where Zariah was standing? Would you have talked or would you have stayed silent? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because what happens next inside that diner is going to change everything you think you know about power. Those 2 men didn't rush. That was the part that made the room feel wrong in a whole new way. A rushed man is afraid. A man who walks slow into a room that already has a gun in it is something else entirely. They moved between the tables without looking left or right, their eyes fixed on the booth in the back like every other person in that diner was furniture. The masked gunman near the counter turned his head slightly, and the tremor in his hand got worse. He hadn't expected them. Whatever plan he'd walked in with, it was already coming apart at the seams. Zariah saw all of it. She read the room the way she had learned to read every difficult situation she had ever been dropped into. She noted the gunman's reaction, the way his shoulders tightened when those men entered, the way he took one small step back without realizing he was doing it.
She noted the man in the navy suit who had gone completely still in a different way now, the stillness of a man doing rapid calculations behind very calm eyes. She noted the exits, the back hallway past the kitchen, the front door still within reach, the window to her left where afternoon traffic moved lazily past without any idea what was unfolding on the other side of the glass. "Mr. Vale," one of the two men said, stopping at the edge of the booth. He had a voice built for corporate boardrooms, smooth and controlled, the kind of voice that expected to never be questioned. "We didn't expect to find you all the way out here." The man in the navy suit, Darian Vale, did not answer right away. He looked at the two men in front of him with the kind of stillness that comes from years of learning not to give anything away for free. Then he picked up his coffee cup, took one slow sip, and set it back down on the saucer. "I eat where I want," he said. The taller of the two men smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. This was the moment Zariah understood that the boy with the gun near the register was the smallest problem in the room. He was a distraction, a door someone else had opened to get Darian Vale sitting still in a place where no security detail could reach him in time. Zariah's hands were still flat on the counter. She was measuring the distance between every person in the room. She was counting seconds. She was watching the gunman's grip loosen and tighten and loosen again as his confidence unraveled stitch by stitch. She had one play forming in the back of her mind, slow and careful, the way she had learned to think through problems that had no clean answers. Then Darian looked up from the table. He looked past the two men standing over him. He looked straight across the diner, straight through all the noise and the danger and the distance, and he looked directly at her. And very softly, barely loud enough to cross the room, he said one word: "Z." The air went out of Zariah's lungs. Nobody had called her that in 7 years. Who do you think Darian Vale really is to Zariah, and why would a billionaire be sitting alone in a roadside diner with no protection? Leave your theory in the comments, because the truth behind that one word is going to crack this entire story wide open.
7 years fell on her all at once, not slowly, the way memories usually come back, all at once like cold water, like a door opening in a dark hallway with the light already on the other side. Zariah's hands pressed harder against the countertop, and she held herself completely still because every muscle in her body had just received 2 separate signals at the same time: stay present and go back. She went back. It was 2 in the morning on a Thursday, raining, the kind of rain that soaks through a coat in under a minute. She had been 20 years old, working the overnight shift at a 24-hour diner across town, pouring coffee for truck drivers and night shift nurses, and the occasional person who just couldn't sleep. She had been 3 chapters deep into a pharmacology textbook propped against the napkin holder when she looked up and saw a man sitting down at the far end of the counter. He hadn't ordered anything. He hadn't even looked at a menu. He just sat there with both hands wrapped around an empty mug and stared at it like it had said something terrible to him. She had seen exhausted people before. She had seen grieving people. She had seen people who came into late-night diners because the silence of their own houses had become unbearable. But this man had something different in his eyes, something final, the kind of stillness that isn't rest at all. She poured coffee into his mug without asking, slid it toward him, sat down on her stool and went back to her textbook without making a production of it. He didn't touch the coffee. After a long time, he said, "You're not going to ask me if I'm okay?" She turned a page. "You're not okay. Asking won't change that." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "I was up on the bridge tonight, the one on Mercer." She looked up then. She looked at him fully, the way she was looking at the gunman now, reading everything his body was saying that his words weren't. Then she turned another page and said, "Whatever you're thinking about doing up there, wait until morning.
things looked completely different in the morning. He had sat there for 2 more hours, drank 3 cups of coffee, left a $50 tip on a $4 order, and walked out into the rain without telling her his name. She never knew what happened to him. She turned that moment over for months afterwards, wondering. Then nursing school got harder, her grandmother got sicker, and life moved forward the way it always does, carrying you past the things you can't hold on to. And now he was sitting in booth 3 of her diner. Darian Vale. She knew that name. Everyone in Atlanta knew that name. Tech, real estate, a face on the cover of 3 different magazines in the past year alone. That man, that face, those same eyes, older now, steadier, but carrying the exact echo of the person who had sat at her counter in the rain at 2 in the morning with nothing left. The taller of the 2 men shifted toward Darian, and the sound of the movement pulled Zariah back into the room with full force. Then came a sound that sealed every exit, the mechanical click of a weapon being cocked. Did a 20-second conversation from a stranger at 2 in the morning actually build an entire empire? And if Zariah had looked away that night instead of pouring that coffee, what would have happened to Darian Vale? Think about that. Then stay right here, because the next 60 seconds inside this diner are about to show you exactly what one moment of human kindness is actually worth.
Zariah moved before anyone else in that room had processed what the sound meant. Not toward the door, not toward the floor. She stepped sideways along the counter, putting herself at an angle between Darian's booth and the man whose weapon had just announced itself to every person in the room. It was not a dramatic move. It was not a show. It was a precise, deliberate step taken by someone who had already decided what she was willing to do before the situation asked her to do it. The 2 men turned and looked at her. The masked gunman near the register stared. Even Darian sat forward slightly in his booth, his eyes sharpening. "You've made your point," Zariah said, and her voice carried across the diner with the same steady weight it had carried every word since this started. She was talking to the man whose weapon was cocked, not the boy with the shaking hand, the one who thought he was running this. "Everyone in this room knows why you're here. You've been heard." The taller man looked at her the way people look at something unexpected that has just walked into their line of sight. "Little girl," he started. "Don't," she said. Just that one word, flat, absolute, the kind of word that stops a sentence before it can become a mistake. She kept her eyes on him. "You came in here to send a message. I get that. The neighborhood, the properties, the people getting pushed out of houses their grandparents paid for. That is a real thing. That anger is real. I am not standing here to tell you that it isn't." She paused long enough to let that land. "But this right here is not strategy. This is a man with a gun in a diner full of people who have nothing to do with a single decision he ever made." She tilted her head toward Darian. "And if something happens in this room today, you lose every piece of leverage you ever had. Every news cycle tomorrow is about the violence, not the displacement. You hand him the story." The room was absolutely silent. The masked gunman had lowered his weapon completely without appearing to notice he had done it. The shorter man looked at the taller man. Darian Vale had not moved, but something in the set of his shoulders had changed. He was watching Zariah with an expression that was not easy to name. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was the look of a man watching a person do the thing he always suspected they were capable of, finally out in the open, where he could see it clearly. "You don't burn the house," Zariah said quietly, "when you could own it." The taller man's jaw tightened. His weapon stayed where it was.
The shorter man pushed back from the table and stood slowly. The calculation was visible in both their faces. They had walked into this room believing they held every card, and a woman in a burgundy vest and pearl earrings had just laid out in under 2 minutes and without raising her voice once exactly why every card they were holding was worth less than they thought. The front windows lit up with the flash of headlights pulling hard against the curb. 3 black SUVs, doors already opening before the vehicles stopped moving. The 2 men looked at the windows, looked at each other, and the diner exploded into motion. She didn't raise her voice once, and she still changed the entire direction of that room. When was the last time you watched someone use words the way other people use weapons? Comment below, and don't go anywhere, because when those SUV doors opened, the real story was only just beginning.
The noise came all at once, and then, very quickly, it was over. Boots on linoleum, voices giving sharp commands. The masked gunman bolted through the side hallway before anyone could cut off the exit, his sneakers squeaking against the floor, the gun left behind on the counter like something he was relieved to be rid of. The 2 men in dark jackets moved toward the front door in the same breath and pushed past the security team pouring in, absorbing the shoulder contact without flinching and clearing the entrance before positions could be locked. Police sirens were already building in the distance, growing louder in overlapping waves. And then the room went quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes after something loud. The cook came out of the back hallway slowly, both hands raised, even though nobody was asking for that anymore. The woman in the corner booth sat up and pulled her daughter into her lap and pressed her face into the child's hair without saying a single word. A man near the window picked up the broken pieces of his coffee mug from the floor and stacked them into a small pile just to have something to do with his hands. Zariah stood at the counter. She reached out and picked up the gun the masked man had left behind by the barrel, careful, deliberate, and set it flat on the shelf beneath the register where it was out of sight. Then she straightened up, smoothed the front of her burgundy vest, and started picking up the napkins that had blown off the nearest table during all of it. She was picking up napkins. One of the security team members walked toward her with his hand raised, already talking, already asking her to stay where she was, and she looked at him with an expression that made him stop mid-sentence and simply nod instead. She kept picking up napkins. It was Darian who crossed the room. He came around the edge of the booth slowly, the way a person moves when they are aware that any fast motion right now would be the wrong kind. He stopped a few feet from the counter. He looked at her. She didn't look up immediately. She finished stacking the napkins, set them in their holder, and then turned to face him. "You still don't panic," he said. His voice was low, not performative, just an observation, the kind that carries weight because the person saying it already knows it to be deeply true. Zariah looked at him for a long moment, at the face she had looked at on magazine covers and news sites without ever connecting it to the wet, broken man at her counter at 2 a.m. The eyes were the same. Older, yes. Steadier, yes. But the same. "You look different," she said, "without rain on your face." Something moved through him, a shift so quick it was almost invisible. He exhaled. "I owe you something I don't have a word for," he said. She shook her head. "You don't owe me anything." "Zariah." "I poured coffee," she said. "That's all I did." He looked at her the way people look at someone who genuinely does not understand the size of what they did, and he didn't argue. He just stood there in the quiet of the aftermath, in the diner that smelled now of cold coffee and tension and the faint chemical edge of fear starting to leave a room. Then his expression shifted. Something behind his eyes closed slightly, the way a door closes when a decision has just been made on the other side of it. "You need to understand something," he said quietly. "What happened today, what those men know about you now, the fact that you stepped in front of me.
He paused. "I want you nowhere near this fallout." Zariah tilted her head. She studied him with those same steady eyes that had not flinched once through any of it. And she said nothing, because silence, she had learned a long time ago, is sometimes the loudest answer in the room. Outside, a news van was already pulling into the lot. He just told her to walk away, but something in the way she went quiet says she has absolutely no intention of doing that. What do you think Zariah is going to do next? And more importantly, why do you think those men knew her name before they even walked through that door? Drop your answer below, and make sure you are here for Chapter 6, because the offer Darien Vale is about to make is going to force her to choose between safety and everything she actually believes in.
He came back 3 days later. No security team this time, no black SUVs parked at the curb with engines running, just Darien Vale, in a plain gray shirt and dark jeans, walking through the front door of the diner like a regular person, which he absolutely was not, and sitting down in the same booth he had been sitting in when everything fell apart. He picked up a menu he clearly wasn't reading and waited. Zariah saw him the moment he walked in. She finished delivering 2 plates of eggs to the couple at the window table, refilled the coffee at the counter without being asked, and walked to booth 3 with her order pad and the same expression she wore for every other customer on every other Tuesday morning. "What can I get you?" she said. Not a question, a starting position. Darien set the menu down. "I came to talk." "I figured." She didn't move. "Coffee?" "Please." She poured it, capped the pot, and stood across from him with her hand resting on the back of the opposite bench. She did not sit down. That was deliberate, and they both knew it. "I want to help you," he said, "with your grandmother's medical bills, with nursing school. I looked into what you're carrying financially, and it doesn't have to stay that way. I can make one call and eliminate all of it by end of week." The diner hummed around them. Someone's toast popped up across the room. A child 2 tables over laughed at something on a tablet screen. Ordinary sounds, ordinary morning, except for the fact that Zariah's expression had shifted into something Darien clearly had not expected. She wasn't moved. She wasn't grateful. She looked at him the way she had looked at the trembling gunman, measuring, reading, seeing past the surface of what was being offered to the structure underneath it. "No," she said. He blinked. "Zariah." "I said no." She said it without heat, without drama, just a flat, clean refusal that sat on the table between them like something solid. "I don't need you to fix my life. My grandmother's situation is mine to handle. My school is mine to handle. I've been handling it. You shouldn't have to do it alone. You don't know what I should have to do." She said it without cruelty, but without any softness either. "You walked back in here because you feel like you owe me something. I understand that. But writing a check doesn't settle what you think you owe. It just makes you feel better, and I am not here for your peace of mind." Darien was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his coffee. He looked at his hands. He was a man who had sat across from investors, politicians, and opposition attorneys in high-stakes rooms all over the country, and not one of them stopped him mid-sentence the way she did, not with volume, but with precision. "Then what do you want?" he asked. And the question sat in the air between them, genuine and open, and slightly raw in a way that his voice rarely was. Zariah looked at him for a long moment before answering. She opened her mouth, and then his phone buzzed on the table between them, and they both looked down at the screen at the same time. A news alert, his name in the headline, and beneath it, 3 words that told them both the conversation had just changed completely. Vale Development under fire. He came back with a checkbook, and she shut it down without blinking. But that news alert just changed every calculation in the room.
What do you think Zariah actually wants? Because whatever she's about to say next is going to determine the direction of both their lives. Drop your answer in the comments right now.
The letter arrived on a Wednesday, slipped under the back door of the diner sometime between the morning rush and noon, tucked inside a plain white envelope with no stamp and no return address and nothing written on the outside at all. Zariah found it when she went to take out the recycling. She stood in the narrow back alley behind the diner, the Georgia sun pressing down on the back of her neck, and she opened it right there. One small folded piece of paper inside. No signature, no explanation. 3 words printed in plain black ink in the center of the page. You chose sides. She read it twice. Then she folded it back into the envelope, slid it into the pocket of her apron, and went back inside and finished the lunch shift without telling a single person about it. That was on Wednesday. By Thursday, the story had moved online. A former classmate named Deja Moorfield, someone Zariah had shared exactly 4 classes with during her first year of nursing school and had not spoken to since, posted a 2-minute video on social media that opened with a close-up of her own face and the words, "We need to talk about Zariah Benton." The video had been shared 9,000 times before Zariah even knew it existed. In it, Deja questioned why Zariah had been at the diner that day in the first place, why a man like Darian Vale had known her name specifically, and whether the woman people were calling a hero was actually much closer to the problem than anyone wanted to admit. The comments section was a battlefield. By Friday morning, 2 people Zariah had grown up with in her neighborhood had sent her the video directly. No message attached, just the link. That particular silence said more than any caption would have. Zariah sat at her grandmother's kitchen table that evening and read through everything, every comment, every share, every version of a story that was being told by people who had not been inside that diner, who did not know what she had said or why she had said it, or what it had cost her to stand still while a gun was pointed at her face and stay completely calm while a cocked weapon filled the room. Her grandmother, Celestine, moved through the kitchen behind her, 81 years old, slow on her left side since the last hospital stay, but still fully present, still watching everything the way she always had, taking in far more than she let on. Zariah set the phone down on the table and pressed both hands flat against the surface. For the first time since the diner, her hands weren't steady. She thought about calling Darian's office and telling them she was stepping back from whatever it was they had started to discuss. She thought about how much cleaner everything would be if she just let this go, let him figure out his development situation without her involvement, return to doubles and her grandmother's medications and the nursing school application she had started filling out 3 times and never finished. Go back to small, go back to manageable, go back to the version of her life that people weren't making videos about. She was still thinking it when Celestine sat down across from her at the table. The old woman looked at her grandmother's hands pressed flat against the wood. She looked at the phone screen, still lit, still full of strangers' opinions about a person they had never met. Then she looked up at Zariah's face. "You don't run anymore," Celestine said quietly. Not a question, not advice. Just a statement of fact delivered by someone who had watched this girl outrun things her whole life and had been waiting a long time to say those 4 words out loud. Zariah looked at her grandmother, and something behind her eyes shifted. A woman who never flinched in front of a loaded gun almost broke sitting at her grandmother's kitchen table because of a social media video. That is what social pressure can do to a person. But Celestine just said something in 4 words that a therapist couldn't have said in 4 sessions.
What do you think Soraya decides to do next? Comment below and stay with the story.
Soraya called Darian's office on Saturday morning and asked for a private meeting. Not at the diner, not at any of his offices where his board members and assistants and communications team would be watching the room. She named a conference space at the public library 2 miles from her neighborhood and told his assistant to have him there at 10. He was there at 9:55. She walked in at 10 exactly, set a folder on the table between them, and sat down. "I don't want the check," she said before he could speak. "I want 20 minutes, and I want you to actually listen." Darian folded his hands on the table. "I'm listening." She opened the folder. Inside were printed pages, property maps, census data, median household income figures broken down by block, school enrollment numbers from before and after the last 2 major development projects in the West Side District. She had spent the past 48 hours pulling every piece of public data she could find, cross-referencing it with the community impact reports that his own company had filed with the city, and then comparing those reports to what had actually happened on the ground in the neighborhoods after each project completed. The gap between what those reports promised and what they delivered was not a small one. She walked him through it, without rushing, page by page, number by number. She wasn't performing outrage. She wasn't delivering a speech. She was presenting information the way she had been trained to present clinical data in nursing coursework, clearly, specifically, with the source cited and the implications stated plainly. When she got to the last page, she turned it toward him and tapped a column of numbers on the right side. "This is what a community equity structure looks like. Not charity, not a foundation with your name on the building. Actual ownership stakes distributed to long-term residents before construction begins, not after. A profit-sharing model tied to property value increases so the people who were already there benefit from the growth instead of being replaced by it. It's been done in 3 other cities. It works." Darian had not interrupted her once. He looked at the last page for a long time. "My board won't accept this," he said. "I know. They'll say it changes the return structure, that it creates legal complications, that it sets a precedent they can't manage across other markets. I know that too," she said, "and I also know that you built everything you have by making decisions your board told you were impossible." She closed the folder. "The 2 men who walked into the diner didn't come because you're a bad person. They came because your model gives people no road in and no road out. Fix the model." The room was quiet. Darian looked at the woman across the table from him, this woman who had talked down a gunman, held a room together through a confrontation that most trained professionals would have mishandled, refused a check that would have solved every immediate problem in her own life, and had now spent her weekend off building a structural economic proposal on her own time because she thought it was the right thing to do. He picked up the folder. He read the last page again. Then he looked up. "Give me the room," he said. His next board meeting was in 72 hours. His communications team was already managing the press coverage of the West Side backlash. Every advisor he had was telling him to hold his position and wait out the noise. And Darian Vale stood up from the table and said out loud, to no one but her, "She's right." He told his board she was right before he told his own communications team. Think about what that means. Think about what a man like Darian Vale giving that kind of public credit actually costs him in certain rooms. What do you think happens at that board meeting? Leave your prediction below, because the next chapter is where everything either holds together or falls completely apart. The press conference was on a Tuesday, 12 days after the robbery, 9 days after the letter, 6 days after the library meeting. Darian's communications team had pushed for a controlled environment, a prepared statement, a few selected journalists, a clean backdrop. Darian overruled every single one of those suggestions and held the conference outside, on the corner of Ashby and Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, 1 block from the first property in the West Side project, in front of anyone who wanted to stand on the sidewalk and listen.
A lot of people wanted to stand on the sidewalk and listen. Zoraya stood to the left of the small platform they had set up, not on it. She was in a dark blazer over a white shirt, her hair pulled back the same way it was when she was working, her hands still at her sides. Reporters she recognized from local stations were in the front row. Behind them, residents, older men with their arms crossed, women with children at their hips, a few younger faces she recognized from the neighborhood, people who had grown up on the streets that were now marked on developer maps with little colored dots that meant something was about to change whether they agreed to it or not. Darian spoke for 11 minutes. He did not use notes. He did not look at his phone. He stood at that outdoor podium in his navy suit, and he spoke with the particular weight of a person who has made a decision they know is going to cost them something real and have decided it is worth the cost anyway. He announced the halt of the current development structure. He announced the Community Equity Partnership, ownership stakes for long-term residents, a profit-sharing framework tied to property appreciation, an independent oversight board with actual authority, not advisory language, actual authority, to reject phases of the project that failed to meet agreed-upon standards. He named 3 community leaders who had agreed to sit on that board after seeing the proposal Zoraya had built. And then he said her name. The advisory board will be led by Zoraya Benton, he said, who designed the framework you're hearing about today, and who understands the connection between economic structure and community dignity in a way that I had to be shown. The crowd response was not a roar. It was something quieter and more serious than that. Applause that carried weight rather than volume. A few people in the back calling out names of streets and houses and neighbors in affirmation. An older woman near the left side of the crowd pressing both hands against her mouth. Zoraya did not smile for the cameras. She nodded once, slowly, and looked out at the faces of people she had grown up near, people whose situations were real and whose futures had been treated like variables in someone else's equation, and she let the weight of the moment sit exactly where it was without trying to perform anything on top of it. She had not accepted charity. She had not been rescued. She had built the thing and put her name on it, and now it was real. After the cameras lowered and the crowd began to thin, a young woman from the communications team handed Zoraya a small envelope that had been left at the check-in table. No name on the outside. The young woman said a man had left it and walked away before she could ask who he was. Zoraya held the envelope and did not open it. Not yet. She designed the whole framework. She didn't accept a check, and she didn't wait for permission. She built it. But that envelope, left by a man nobody could identify at a press conference that the whole city was watching, what is inside it? Because whatever it says, it tells us this story is not finished, not even close. Comment what you think is in that envelope right now.
The diner was quiet by 7 in the evening. The last table had cleared out by 6:45, and Zoraya had wiped down the counters and restocked the napkin holders and turned the sign on the door from open to closed the same way she had done 1,000 times before all of this, before news vans and board meetings and press conferences on street corners and envelopes left by men with no names. She was sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched yet when she heard the bell above the door. She had left it unlocked. She wasn't entirely sure why. Darian came in alone. No security, no team. He was in a plain jacket and dark pants, and he looked, for the first time since she had seen him again after 7 years, like the man who had sat at a counter in the rain with nothing left. Not because he was broken, but because he wasn't performing anything. He was just a person, walking into a diner on a Tuesday evening because he needed to be somewhere honest. He sat down 2 stools away from where she was sitting. She poured him a coffee without asking. They sat in the quiet of the empty diner for a moment before either of them spoke. The ceiling fan ticked above them. Headlights from passing cars moved across the front windows in slow intervals. Outside, Atlanta carried on with its ordinary evening,
completely unaware that the two people sitting at this particular counter were the still center of something that had changed the shape of a neighborhood, and possibly more than that, depending on what happened next. "Are you afraid?" he asked. He wasn't asking about the robbery. He wasn't asking about the board members who had pushed back hard at the meeting, or the online noise that was still running, or the journalists who had already called her personally looking for angles she had no interest in giving them. He was asking about all of it, the whole weight of what she had stepped into. Zariah picked up her coffee cup, held it, set it back down. "I've been afraid before," she said. "It doesn't stop me." He nodded. He looked at his hands. "That night on the bridge," he said, "I had already decided. I was completely decided. And then you poured that coffee like I was just a regular person having a bad night, and you told me to wait." He paused. "You gave me back the morning. Every single thing I built, because you gave me back the morning." She was quiet for a moment. "Then do something worthy of it," she said simply. "Not for me, for the people who need the morning given back to them and don't have anyone pouring the coffee." The diner was silent around them. Then she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out the envelope from the press conference. She had been carrying it all day. She set it flat on the counter between them, still sealed. She looked at it for a long moment. She opened it. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. She unfolded it, read it. Her hands did not shake, but her eyes went still in the way they go still when a person has just received information that rearranges something important. She read it twice. Then she set it down on the counter face up, flat under the fluorescent light of the diner, and Darian leaned slightly to read it without picking it up. 3 words. "You chose sides." The same 3 words from the first letter. But this time there was a 4th line beneath them, something the first letter hadn't carried. "We're watching you lead." Zariah picked the paper back up and put it back in the envelope. She picked up her coffee cup. She drank from it, and her hands were completely steady. She didn't flinch, not once, not in front of the gun, not in front of the board, not in front of the letter, and not right now. That 4th line changes everything about who sent those messages and why. This story is not over. There are people watching Zariah lead, and not all of them are on her side. If you want to know what comes next, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a single episode. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, because the people who need it most are usually the ones who won't find it on their own. And drop in the comments the one moment in this story that hit you the hardest. Your words might be exactly what someone else in this community needs to read. We'll see you in the next one.